gone nearly pallid as an undead. Are you passing?
No, 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 no. Just one of those nights.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Chief Secrets podcast. And today we're covering Frieren, Beyond Journey's End, and our as our continuation slash conclusion to our pilot season. As yeah, holy, I can't talk today. Uh, hello, I'm one of your co-hosts, the geeky writer.
I'm Crimson Maroon.
And I'm Sprinks. You look up Cheap Seat Critics podcast on the interwebs or wherever you look it up, maybe like the bulletin board at a Petco or something. We're over on Twitter and Instagram and Facebook and TikTok, and we got a letterbox, and we got YouTube and Rumble for visual side of things with PNG tubers and a slideshow of whatever we're covering. But hey, the PNG tubers we got right now for this pilot season, they'll be changed back to our originals. So cool variation now. See them while you can. And I think that's it.
Yeah. Sorry, you're saying something, Crimson?
I was saying wonderful. Splendid.
Splendid. All right. Yeah. So we're covering Frieren. Let's do histories before facts because I have a sneak suspicion this is going to be kind of short. Um,
No.
so Crimson, why don't you lead us off with history?
Oh, I'm so glad you picked me first. I never heard of it until you pitched it as a pilot. Having watched the pilot, I have not seen anything of it. A screenshot, an image, nothing. Had nothing going into this. So there's my history.
Springs.
Let's see. This classically, I could word it like writer, where never heard of it, don't know anything about it until the pod. But being that writer here has picked Bell and Weathering with You, when it came to his first two picks for the pilot season, I'm like, oh, kind of surprised there's no anime in here. And then boom, he puts in Freerun. I watched it twice. I watched it once as a sub, and then I was informed by writer that we're doing the dub version. I'm like, okay, and then I watched it again.
So you watched it twice for the pod. Yay. My history is not that much longer. I have seen the whole show in its entirety up until the end of the first season, which is 28 episodes long. I've seen the first episode now 4 times, and I saw it twice for the podcast. I wanted to watch it once without taking notes for the podcast, just to refresh everything, and then again to take notes. So I technically did it twice for the podcast. But yeah, I have seen the whole show. I had never heard of it before until it got recommended to me because I'm a huge high fantasy guy when it comes to stories and stuff like that. So eventually, this got pitched to me as a good high fantasy, and I quite enjoyed myself. So figured I'd
That's
share.
awesome.
Yeah. Um, and I guess with that, I'll roll us into facts. Funny enough, I couldn't find much of a budget for this, but it is produced by the studio Madhouse, directed by I'm so going to butcher these names. Kerichi Saito, who has also directed several movies in the anime industry, and yeah, he's pretty much one of the most acclaimed people working over there right now on the in the anime industry and stuff like that. Um, Originally, the pilot was also released with the pilot of this series was released with the following 3 episodes. So all 4 episodes were released at the same time, which is very unusual for anime. Um, Having the 4 episodes released as a sort of mini series all at once. Um, but this is obviously the first episode in that series, and that's pretty much all I have for facts. So, thoughts, gentlemen, or facts of your own?
I got no facts.
Um, Not a distinct fact that I took, but one thing that I guess I can put out is that the subtitles in the sub don't fully translate to the same in the dub version, and some of the dialogue is changed.
Yeah, that's usually normal. Um, Obviously, the this is produced. One of the studios producing this is Crunchyroll, and it's used to they usually make changes from the sub to the dub to make it one more digestible with the animation, because sometimes what they're saying in Japanese, if it was a literal translation, doesn't work with the animation of what the characters are saying, and it also helps with trying to, I guess, make it more acclimatized to Western audiences, because there are some jokes in Japanese that wouldn't land as well as if it were literal and literally translated into English. So that's kind of common when that there will be some changes. There are usually changes with regards to between animes, like going from the sub to the dub. It's usually very minor, and from what I remember, as far as Frieren is concerned, it has been a while since I've watched it in the sub version, since it was only just first airing. I do think the changes are still minor, as far as I remember.
Okay. Huh. Yeah, nothing seemed
Why?
too wild.
Yeah, it wasn't wildly ridiculous. Like, they didn't change the characters and stuff like that. Though that has been done before. There are some dubs that like completely take a serious character and work them into a comedy character. It's been done before. They've done it smoothly before. It's just very rare when they do like grand changes like that.
Funny you should mention that because I kind of got that.
Interesting.
Yeah. It
Sure,
wasn't
we'll
fully
cover that.
damaging, but Frieren's character to me was portrayed slightly different between the sub and the dub.
Yeah, there is definitely a difference in tone. I think the character overall is the same though. So, but that being said, we're focusing on the dub version for today. And I guess with that, we shall dive right in. Our structure is going to be popcorn to our best of our ability, since I'm assuming most of us wrote our notes linearly anyway. Um,
Joke's on you. I went backwards.
Yeah, that's weird. You did like 3 times more effort that way.
and I guess to start us out, Crimson, why don't you start?
Okay, I shall start not at the beginning. Bum, 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 bum. Uh, I'll jump straight to uh, Himnel. Uh, sure, Himnel.
Yeah.
uh,
Well,
his his grave. Probably my favorite part in the episode was probably a lot of people's favorites. I would guess, and that's just Firen's crack. I guess the little reveal to her, because we don't know how old she is. And I was thinking this whole time, like, okay, if she cracks, they need to make it good because she's probably hundreds or thousands of years old and she's been around humans for a while. Why would she care about these people to this be a moment? And I wanted to know you guys' thoughts if they did establish enough for her to actually have a crack here for only 10 years.
Uh, it's hard to say. Yes, because we don't know anything else more about her past at this moment. I don't know how many other adventuring parties or companions she's had in her lifetime, and it kind of portrays that this is like a big important one, or maybe possibly her main one, because she says a mere 10 years at the beginning of like their adventure, and the other ones see like that as a big time frame because it's a difference between elves and humans, or if they are humans. um, so I think the emotional weight of that to hit portrays that this is kind of like a first understanding of having a close relationship with a human for her.
um,
Yeah.
uh,
What we get with her age, with numbers, anyways, is we know she's older than 50 at the start of this because she saw the previous meteor shower before. So we know she's at the very least, at least by the end of this, 100 and
20.
the end of this, she's 120. Yeah, but I certainly think she's way older than that. But that's the only numbers we get to work with in the pilot.
Um, in isolation to that scene, yes, I thought we got enough. Because at least we get a sense of her being an oddity to the group. She's different, but they're all used to her like odd quirks and everything. And I think they did the crack very well. When it's sort of triggered off of something Heiter says. Um, it's not like we're racked with grief either. Or in these, they call the two. They're heckling the dwarf and Eisen and Heiter and calling them heartless, and he says, "How would I know?" And that transitions into Frieren's crack pretty much. Um, which and then we also get the flashbacks, the quick like image of flashbacks of them having fun together as a group and stuff like that. And it's kind of I think they did it well enough. Yes, within the first episode, there is more context that is added to this as obviously you go along in the series.
Yeah, I figured there would be. And I also agree. I think they did a good enough job with it.
Since we're on the
Which,
scene, I do want to talk real quick. I like that Hyder and Eisen just comfort her.
in the church, or
Yes, in both in the church and at the grave.
yeah, they're good pals. That 10 years. That's a long time to some,
Yeah,
but not
and
all.
I do like the. I just quite like that. I guess their demeanor towards it as well. Like they're not heartless. They're joyful because they know their friend lived a full life, and they're willing to take heat off of Frieren, who doesn't really. There are two facets to this. One, they're bailing Frieren out, but they're also being joyful about their friend still, even in his passing, which I think is very in character for both Eisen and Heiter with how little we get of them in this episode. We get a lot, but you know what I'm saying.
Yeah, and Hyder's a religious guy, so he pretty much commented he thinks all of them have secured a place in heaven. Later, he says that. Uh, so he's not worried about where Himmel's going now. He thinks he's in a better place now. There's no reason for him to be sad.
Mhm.
And Eisen, we don't really know much about him at all. So,
Yeah,
tough dwarf.
he's characterized in the episode, but yeah, there's definitely more to be explored there. Um, and I guess we'll go to Spriggs. Questions, thoughts, a place to jump to.
I'll go with that. I found it weird that someone threw a rock at Eisen at a funeral. I think it was
Oh
a little
yeah, it
much.
chinked off his helmet.
Yeah, that seems to
uh,
be too hostile for the environment.
I would agree. Yeah. I mean, then this is Himmel's hometown, so they might just really, really love him. So they might see that as disrespectful.
I mean, there's already a
We
statue
also,
erected of all of them.
yeah, that's true. We have no idea how, other than that he's apparently beloved in this town. We don't know who threw a rock at him, which I think helps keep it ambiguous. Because I think there was a way to justify it. It could be kids who just don't know who they are, um, like who Himmel's party mates are, like fully. Which would be surprising given that there's a statue. But yeah, I'm in agreement that I would have have a minor nitpick with that as well.
Um, I don't know. I don't really see an issue with that. I mean, the statue was erected a little less than 50 years because we got to take into account how long it took to make it. But that's enough for a good chunk of the town to have died, and a new generation has taken its place to not really acknowledge statues. I mean, we could walk around our cities and there's statues that no one really knows anything about unless they read the plaque. So even though he's still a living hero, a good chunk of the place probably don't really acknowledge him as anything. And I would think the one who throws the rock is someone old enough to remember the journey and found it as disrespectful to not honor him with tears. Right.
Yeah.
So I definitely think it's within someone's capabilities to throw a rock at a funeral, especially at the setting we're at, being medieval times.
Yeah, that's also true. Uh, like I said, if it is an issue, it's a very minor one. I'm kind of uh, I guess I'm conflicted on it, I suppose, but I don't know if that's an objective issue. I'll put it that way. Um,
I saw it as a use of humor.
oh yeah, it's definitely a use of humor. A lot of the humor here is contextual to like whatever their situation is. You're poking fun at Heiter's drinking habits. I guess I don't really have much more on that for now. I'll jump to funny enough the beginning, the opening. Uh, I it's unusual, which is why I wrote it down. Usually, an anime opening is reserved for the ending of the first episode, like the credits. While here, the opening just comes straight from the first, right out of the gate, and I think that's purposeful, in the sense of it's meant to serve as a bit of a hook, uh, because it is a very slow first episode.
That is true. It is a little bit of a slower one. Not your typical anime action going on everywhere. You get the fight of the dog, but they don't really focus on it at all. It's just a passing thing.
Yeah.
Interesting. You both thought of it as a slow episode, like in its entirety.
It's a slow burn. They're just building
I
the
don't
world
see it
right
as
now.
I don't see it as to be clear, I don't see it being slow as an issue. I just think it would typically be classified as slow for some. So
Slow doesn't mean bad.
I'm assuming you have some more thoughts to add on that, Springs.
I mean, I didn't find it slow at all. Of the majority of it, once Frieren got to Heiter's like house, like the tree when it cuts to black, and um, then she's in the Holy Lands. That's when I found it starting to get slow. But the entire like story of Himmel, I thought was well paced.
It's Himmel, but
Himmel,
yeah,
sorry.
no worries. Um, yeah, I think I think like I said, I don't need like big action set pieces, so I actually like that it's a slow burn. I don't find the pacing to be particularly atrocious. I thought it was all important. It was all character building. Um, they don't really waste a moment when all of our characters are together, for sure. Um, anyways, what did you guys think of the opening?
I wrote down in my notes that it was unusual, and I was going to ask you, but you already answered. Of like, how common is it for an intro to an anime to start off in a pilot? And being that it's not, and the purpose of using it as such, I found it connected to the feeling that this 10-year adventuring party were at the end of their adventure, and I feel like it's somehow connected to that, as I interpreted it, where it's the intro, as you said, is usually at the end of an episode for a pilot, which is like the whole introduction of characters' world and all that in that said pilot. By starting it, I feel like that's kind of a meta feel that they used of a whole story we're unfamiliar with.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that because uh, when we first meet our characters, the adventure is over. They've killed the Demon King, which is such a tropey thing in anime. There's always a Demon King or a Demon Lord or some big bad that needs to be beaten. They've won at this point, which is I think lends to what the opening actually is because the lyrics of the opening as well go into the point of what the whole story is going to be. It's the story after the epic journey.
Yeah, that's what I took away from the intro is the lyrics. The visuals kind of just seemed whatever to me. But yeah,
What was your
the lyrics told me what was gonna go on with the story. And I think if they removed the intro here and just we started with them in the carriage, I think it would be lesser for that.
I'm in agreement as well, and I'm actually in the opposite. I actually quite like the visuals. I find them very meaningful and impactful for the intro.
Fascinating
Um,
that
yeah,
you latched onto the visuals. Crimson, you latched onto the lyrics, and I latched onto the I guess rhythm of the music, because I felt so much attitude in the beat of what was in the song.
That's an interesting way to describe it. I think assuming you mean that that's the feeling that you get from it.
Yeah, like
I'm thinking right now. I'm
it
thinking right now. If
really
I
gave
close my
me
eyes,
it really gave me,
yeah.
like popular girl walking down the hallway really throwing the hips left and right kind of feel. Like Queen Bee.
If I'm closing my eyes and I'm like not reading the lyrics because I don't understand Japanese fully, obviously. I can sort of get that vibe from the song actually, and I think that's very fitting for Frieren. Uh, at least to a point.
I'd have to re-listen to it again because I didn't get those vibes. But then again, the music part of the song didn't really stick with me. Um,
Yeah,
Maybe it would grow listening to it several times, as a lot of songs do, but and that one
yeah,
didn't really stick with me.
Add it to your
uh,
list.
yeah. Yeah. I added it to my list after about the 10th time I heard the song. I actually really realized I liked it at that point, going through the
Oh,
series.
so you've heard the song outside of the anime, being that's
Uh-huh.
10 and you've seen it 4 times. Or sorry, my mistake. Pilot, you said you've seen all 28 episodes. So
Yeah, yeah. So the opening is the opening. So I heard it at the beginning of every episode. um. So yeah, and I to be clear, I kind of focused on a different thing on my every time I watch the pilot. Springs to kind of go into you absorbing sort of the meta message of it and the rhythm, and Springs Crimson absorbing the lyrics. I decided to focus more on the visuals this time because I've read the lyrics several times at this point. So one of the things I tried to do this time was to kind of focus in on the lyrics and try to get into the symbolism of it because it's very abstract and trigger word for Crimson. But
Yes,
I did like the abstractness of it. There, you definitely get the visuals really work well with the lyrics. I think in terms of conveying like certain parts of the point of the story, where the hero is going to sleep and you see Frieren by herself and uh, kind of in a like a faceless crowd. And then I think the last visual of the opening is probably my favorite, uh, where the Himmel and the party go forward and you see like the two characters we haven't met going backwards, and Frieren is the one that just kind of appears in the middle. I think that to me showed like the point of that to me told me like everything I would need to know about the point of Frieren's story as we're going to follow her. Like
I
she's bridging the gaps between generations and stuff.
I wrote that in my notes as well. The two mirror images at timestamp 1 minute 18 seconds to line up in the middle of Frieren. I thought was really cool.
Yeah. And we do meet one of the characters in the openings at the end of the episode.
burn
Yes.
and not goalie.
No,
All right, Crimson, you got a point you'd like to jump to?
Yeah, it's going to be a general point revolving around Heiter and how old he is. So he's either in his 90s or hundreds at the end of this. It would be 90s if he started the adventure at around 10. Which, being medieval time, it's not impossible to have like a teenager start a journey. Uh, but that's the age we're going with, 90 to 100, and he looks pretty good for I'm going to for me I'm leaning more towards hundreds than 90s.
Uh,
He looks pretty good.
the
He's
only
still
the only
walking.
dir- yeah, one of the direct hints we get as to his age, and the only one we get to the only direct hint we get to Hyder's age is they point out that in as they're joking and under like right outside the city before the meteor shower starts, um, the Himmel cracks a joke saying he's a full grown man now. So they hinted he was the youngest person in their party at some point when he first joined. So that's probably the closest we're gonna get to like being certain about Hyder's age. I think, um, other than obviously your guesstimate.
Yeah, 'cause we have the 50 years, the 20, and then the 10 years that they were adventuring together. And I'm pretty sure they weren't adventuring as babies, so we have to tack on however old we think they were starting.
Yeah. Yeah.
Crimson, one
If I were
aspect
to,
you may have been overlooking is that Heiter could have been drinking alcoholic holy water to slow down his aging process.
Ah, I did overlook that.
yeah, they dive into a little bit of what he did as far as magic in relation to the party. He's not a mage by any means, but he's definitely has magic affluence. Um, so again, that's not really in the first episode. So there is potentially more to quantify that going forward. And we also have him cracking a joke at Frieren saying he is living a healthier life. He at some point he started eating healthy and trying to prolong his life as much as possible.
Well, yeah, and he has a book in his possession which could grant immortality and stuff. Who knows what type of things he's been looking for to prolong his life. Um,
I mean, he has
Uh,
been looking into immortality and resurrection
well,
until,
in
I mean,
terms of that
later.
book, but I mean other sources.
that being said, though, Crimson, I'm probably in agreement with you. I would guess between 90 and 100 because we don't really get much more beyond that. Uh,
10 years of
it
venturing, 50 years next meteor shower, and then a falling 20 after the funeral.
Yeah. So like I said, assuming they're in their teens, that would put them in the 90s. And if they were pushing 20, they go in the hundreds area. So
my presumption he did join is when he's somewhere between teens and 20s,
yeah.
pushing 20s for Heiter. I have a quick note from the very beginning. At the very beginning, we see a map, or like we see the map of the world, and we have a message from the great mage, uh, Flama, who will be relevant later on. So this is actually set up, which I like. Though in isolation to this episode, um, it gives the audience purpose. It gives the audience the bearing of the world. So it serves two purposes functionally for the whole show, being that it's a hint at another future plot point, and it also but for the purposes of just the first episode, it just shows the map, which is important when you're in a fantasy world.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that was something we talked about with Willow lacking was a map.
I know.
It
Willow lacking a
certainly is
map.
one.
We had to go around and find the internet on a map for a Princess Bride.
Oh, yeah.
That's
That was the
that's
other one.
that's true. Yeah. But then I bought a book that had the map in it.
Spriggs got a point.
Yeah, let's see. When they're in the kingdom, I guess the first one after their whole adventure,
Uh,
and they're all celebrated. The big celebration, most of the townsfolk and everyone are human. There's not a lot of other dwarves or elves around present, or any other races for that matter. And I found it interesting that the stained glass window, when they are celebrated by like the royalty or the king or queen or whoever, depicts an elf woman on it.
Yeah, are you thinking that's a free run, essentially?
No,
A Pasla?
maybe no. I could be. I'll say that a past could be, but I don't know. It just an elf of importance that seemed, being that it was focused on, it seemed to have importance, but also like out of place in this kingdom.
Um, don't know because it was at a church. And churches are typically pretty old. They're like one of the first things built when you're building a village or city, town, or what have you. So it could have been a long time ago that this place did have a bunch of elves roaming about. Um, we don't really know the history of the location, so I'm not too worried about it depicting an elf in a predominantly human area. So we just don't know the history of it.
what was the issue that Springs brought up that sorry, hello, I'm back.
I He found it interesting that the stained glass window at the church had an elf on it, considering that most of this place seems to be inhabited by humans?
Yes.
Uh, Interesting question. I wonder if it will be answered.
Well, that sounds
Sounds
like a
like it
hint that it
does.
will. But
But yeah, that was my thoughts on it.
a follow up also is it's very short, but the first sign of the fireworks, which I'm guessing are depicting the Demon King, um, there's uh, written out something at the top stating Chapter 6, the last battle. So chapters were occurring during their adventure or connected to the town in some way or the kingdom.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
I don't know. I guess it's just hinting towards a whole nother story that could be happening. Yeah, I don't know. A
I
little interesting
assumed that.
creative choice.
Yeah, what I assumed was the fireworks were actually uh, telling versions of the story. Um, in the same way, like Gandalf's fireworks can make elaborate, fancy things to try to depict the story or whatever. I assumed that's what they were doing with fireworks. Uh,
I think Smix is more leaning towards the text that was written there.
Yeah, the use of a visual
It was a
storytelling
chapter.
for a celebration about the adventure and things that have occurred, fine. Um, it just plays more into a story that we're not fully familiar with or unknown to, um, but unknowing if that's to the adventuring party's story being retelling or the town um, retelling of like what's happened to them
I would
or
presume
something
it's the
else.
town. I would presume it's the town's retelling of what happened to the adventurers, but I genuinely don't know. Obviously, they're enthralled with celebration because they're now in a time of peace. Um, there's definitely a couple things to read into it. I guess that there any of them could be right. So
I'll jump to another point. This one being a similar one to my previous point regarding age, and this one being with Himmel. And I did not like the way they depicted him as an old man. Uh, this is more subjective leaning, but there's an element of objectiveness to it where it doesn't look anything like him, other than they tried to keep his color scheme. And I know it's kind of a thing with anime, like the short elder. It's kind of like an archetype, visual and a visual archetype. But I feel like they
Heiter
failed
aged
him as a
better.
character. It looked nothing like him.
Yeah.
Yeah,
He lost half his
Yeah.
height.
his colors
Uh,
changed. Bald and
it's
beard
just
versus clean shaven hair. Complete opposite.
not to mention he still has a teenage voice. I don't know. It
Um,
all didn't really meld well.
yeah. I don't know. I don't have a writing issue with it per se, but I can definitely see a visual issue with it. I'm not the biggest fan of Himmel's appearance change either. Though obviously it gets the point across of such drastic change.
Yeah, I
Actually,
think it's even
that's
worse compared to Hyder because he looks
Yeah.
the same just with wrinkles.
that's
I mean,
actually
he
a
actually looks like
great
he's aged.
thing to bring up. If it wasn't for Himmel identifying Frieren, do you think Frieren could identify Himmel in a crowd?
I'm sure the writers would say she could, but I wouldn't be able to.
No, I don't think she would. It's funny because she looks for Himmel at his height first and then looks down. So no, I don't think she would have been able to spot him. But they get to circumvent that problem by having Himmel notice Frieren because Frieren has not aged a day.
Yeah, and even if they didn't do that, they could have someone in the town be like, "Hey, Himmel's out today, uh, our hero." I don't know,
Yeah. Or
to show
Frieren
his
could have just asked for
popularity.
directions. There's plenty of ways that they could have gotten around it.
Yeah,
Uh, I think I don't necessarily have an issue with his appearance, mind you, but if I have to pick part one thing that bugged me, I think it's the difference in height. That was the biggest issue for me. Keeping his color scheme and switching how his hair was being done doesn't bother me at all. I do think that my biggest issue was just the height change.
Like it turns him into a completely different character
Turns into a dwarf.
visually. Yeah,
It-
it's true. The party gained a dwarf. Got two now.
that's true. But yeah, if I were to pick my biggest issue with Himmel's appearance change, it would be that.
Hmm.
Uh,
Okay.
what about you, Springs?
I think it's just too much, and it could have explained like the dragon horn or whatever that he's kept for 50 years could have been affecting him and emitting something because even Frieren didn't know what it did, and like if that explained like it shrunk him or changed this or that, but that's never brought up. So it's just like all these differences in him to identify him different, and then it's made or as you said written in that he identified Frieren versus the other way around. I think it's too much of a convenience sake, and it's just it to me it went too far.
Um, I don't think it's convenient that he identified Frieren. That's what you're hitting at, or are you hitting at the convenience of just how drastic the appearance change was?
You're talking meta sense with the writers choosing to have him identify opposed to her. I think that's what he's going
Yeah,
for.
Um,
Not that the character himself wouldn't identify her, which I think he would.
like it's better that
uh,
Frieren didn't look out in a crowd, see this old man, and identify him, because that would have been like, there's no way you identify him. But if it's like Frieren looked at him and then he looked back and he identified her in that situation and she was confused, I think that would have been strengthened to show human age to time difference that she's not too familiar with.
I I don't know if it's convenient because she's specifically looking for his house. Um, I guess the aspect of like it's the aspect of convenience here for me is just the height change. Really, that would be my biggest issue. I don't have an issue with him identifying Frieren or him taking a casual walk about the town. Um,
Yeah, I don't
Yeah,
have an issue
it
with
I guess it
that.
falls onto a what's possible and feasible, and what they did is possible and feasible, just walking out, whatever. B is why it was made this way and written this way for portrayal, and that's what I'm more focused on.
okay. Um,
Well,
yeah, I
they chose to do this, and um, the fact that they did still fits. Uh, are there but better ways? Sure. Are there worse ways? Absolutely. But what we get based off their choice still fits functionally within the story, fits the characters.
Yeah,
Uh,
which is the A
my
part.
yeah my
I think the
well no,
issue.
I'm talking about you. You're talking about their choice to do it, which is we're assuming their thoughts were she wouldn't be able to identify him because he looks so drastically different. So he should identify her first. That's what we're assuming, but we don't know what they're thinking. Which is the same thing we were having with Brooklyn Nine-Nine, where you were assuming stuff with the numbers. It's a dangerous territory assuming stuff we don't know, and then punishing or um, giving accolades to things we don't know the answers to.
Good point.
Yeah. To kind of add on, not necessarily to, just to add on more thoughts. I'm thinking about there is ways to write this better, just not as efficiently. Because the quote unquote non-convenient way where that would eliminate, I guess, the elements of convenience for you, Springs, would be uh freer and having to stop and talk to someone, which would add which would add more time, or her spotting him in a crowd and passing over him because she doesn't recognize him. It changes the situations and it would add more to the runtime, and I think that's where a lot of it comes down to. So, and then obviously we had talked about what would be worse off is that she just recognizes him instantly. Um, so I think with what we got, I'm not on the side of it being an issue. There's definitely other ways to do this, um, but I'm not convinced that it's, I guess, would be more efficient than what we have.
I think personally for me, as I said, I think it's fine the way it is. But I think if they did it like Knight's Tale with William's dad, where um, in this instance, Frieren sees a villager and asks where Himel lives, and then the villager points to the direction, and then that's it. I think that's totally fine that way, and that would only add a couple seconds to the runtime, which could be retooled
I mean,
to
if
fit.
something needs to be taken out, take out the kid chasing after the goose. To me, that didn't play any need.
I mean, yeah, if they needed a couple seconds, yeah, they could take that because that doesn't really depict the village being different. Because that's one of the first things she says, like, this place has changed in 50 years or last time I was here. And it didn't really look different to me, but I didn't go back and forth to make a comparison.
Good example though with Knight's Tale,
Mm.
except
Indeed.
Himmel isn't blind. But
Well, no, there it would be lacking the emotional aspect of it, but it would get the streamline point across.
I am going to jump to uh how Frieren just like nonchalantly says that she's planned the next 100 years of her life, going to go back to spell collecting in the Midlands or whatever the Central Lands.
Essentially.
Uh, and that's pretty much your first insight as to how she sees time, and like just the throwaway lines of like, "Oh well, I'll show you the meteor shower in 50 years," like nonchalantly because she in her mind, not much is going to change.
Yeah, and he chuckles at it, um, which
Yeah.
definitely makes sense. Yeah, her uh, cavalierness, I guess, towards time is I kind of like it in this. It can really set up some big stuff going forward in the show because, like, we talked about the crack, that was a good crack, but they can get a lot going with her perception of time going forward and
Mhm.
ramifications of it. I don't know if they do, or only Ryder knows that.
Wahaha.
and those out there who have seen the show before listening in,
Well, plus that, I suppose.
But yeah, no, I'm in agreement. For within the first episode, I like the setup because there's a lot of setup for character growth with regards to Frieren, and there's a lot of character growth done in the other characters that are around her, and I think it's extremely well done in that sense. Uh, I'll jump to Heiter really quickly, I guess, on that point. One of the things I like about his conversation with Frieren in his cabin in the woods at the very end, is the fact that he is doing charity work now, which is clearly a. I took it as a sign that Himmel rubbed off on him, and then obviously that he cherished those times. And also, he's sworn off alcohol. Those are some the swearing off alcohol. That's been a consistent joke. So to go to this, that's just an obvious point of like, oh, they're a different person. They're changing their character. The whole thing, which adds to whole Freeren's kind of perception of time, because it feels like Frierin's perception is like they're stuck in that moment, like with how she perceives them. So those small changes are always appreciated, indicating that even though time has passed quite a bit, they're still changing as individuals. Um, and also the fact that Frieren is there because she wants to learn more about Hyder because of what happened with Himmel. So Himmel rubbed off on her too, showing the importance of the tender journey that they had, and ultimately Himmel's death inspiring that part of her character. So I quite like that can be attributed to all the characters, even Eisen for how minimal his character work is done in this first episode. There's still some of that in there as well.
And I imagine she'll grow to appreciate time going forward because she could have, instead of wait 20 years to see him again, could have hung around the town for a few years and still had interactions with him and Eisen and whoever else they would start building relationships with. Uh, but she did shorten her travels to do this, so there's some growth with her there. It's not a 180 from uh, Himmel's death to her now fully appreciating everyone around her.
Yeah, it's a slow character turn, which I like. It's not instant. And for her, she perceives times differently, so it works better than it normally might.
I don't know if you agree with that, Springs. That's
Uh,
yeah, Himmel.
I can see all of it making sense, but I'm slightly feeling it like it's reading into it a bit much. But it still all fits. So never
How did I
crossed my
read
mind, but
into
if that's how you see it,
it?
sounds good.
Which things being read into? Usually, I'm
How
not the one
much
reading
of
into things.
Himmel's rubbing off onto everyone else? Because to me,
I
that would
don't.
Well,
be
I
not just Himmel; it should be everyone for everybody, which would affect everyone, um, rather than just one individual.
Well, he did. At least in what I was saying, he rubbed off on Heiter and he rubbed off on Frieren.
Yeah, and I'm saying that makes sense and it can work fine. I didn't see that, but what you're saying makes sense. But in
Okay,
that
yeah,
situation,
I will absolutely, yeah, I will absolutely point out that's not something I caught in my first watch through.
okay, but in that situation, then, ex- are you saying? Let me clarify. Is this going with all the time they've known each other over like 60 plus years, or is this after the death of Heimel to like keep his what's not spirituality, but keeping it like a
Keeping his
familiarity
memory
with him
alive.
around? Yeah,
Yeah,
keeping his memory alive.
could be. We don't really know. Um,
Well, which one are you leaning on for your example? You're saying, or is it both?
uh, it's both. My
Okay,
example is that they are now this way because of Himmel, whether it is because of the time they spent with him or just to keep the memory alive. Either way, Himmel had rubbed off on them. That's pretty much that's what I take away objectively. What's subjective is your inference on what specifically triggered that, if that makes sense.
okay, huh? Okay, so for me, after the passing of his death, to keep his memory alive, I see far stronger in the usage of the three um, to have whatever rubbed off of Hema onto them. Prior to his death, of being around him, of adventuring for 10 years and what so, I would feel that needs to be onto every character of the party then. So like Eisen onto Frieren, and Frieren onto Heiter, and Heiter onto Eisen, and like all of it, rather than just one individual. But then again, if you've only seen what's being expressed in the pilot of one character of Heimel being the focus of his pretty much his life to death, and that's all that's being portrayed, then definitely easier to see and identify that. But to me, it should be indicated throughout all if it's present. That's why I'm saying I think it's much stronger in going that keeping his memory alive because he's the only one who passed.
Yeah, it might be. I'm in total agreement. That's totally a take to have. I there is definitely more to come in as far as the how the characters rub off each other going forward. I'm just saying specifically in this pilot episode, there's a lot that can be inferred from their choices here by the end as to who they are now as people, and how Himmel rubbed off on them both in life and in death, depending on how you decide to choose to read it.
Gotcha.
Do you have any lasting thoughts on that, Crimson? And if not, feel free to jump to a
mean, I
point.
I feel like they all rubbed off on each other, uh, minus Eisen. Eisen, I don't think he really got much interaction with anyone or rubbing off on anyone. His talk with Frieren, where he's old now, he can't really fight much anymore. That was fine, but that I don't think that left a real mark on her. Um, so he's kind of the outlier for me, but I do feel like Heiter has, and Himmel have left marks on Frieren, and she has left marks on both of them. Um, so I guess that's my part on the rubbing on each other.
Man, you made a sex joke.
Uh,
I'm so proud of
Like
you.
we're really getting close to crossing that line with how much we're saying rubbing.
Yeah. I'm so proud of you, Crimson. You made a sex joke.
Yes.
So yeah, I'll actually talk broadly about Eisen really quickly. Eisen is characterized as the warrior, as the how the king introduces him. Um, I think his character work, at least with regards to this first episode, is is much more on the back end, as the focus is much more on the human characters being Heiter and Himmel and their relationship with Frieren. But I do like the way that Eisen's characterized. Um, he's really the first one to bring up the heavy topic about, wow, their adventure really is over. Once the party's over, he's really the first one to bring it up there. He also jumps in with Hyder, comforting Frieren and heckling the crowd back about not being heartbroken. Um, Comes across as very gruff and fun. Um, but I agree. There's not much going for him yet as far as his first episode is concerned. And but I do like that he's still a sympathetic character for the most part. In the sense of they don't it doesn't really he's not really an obvious outlier in the group, in terms of like what's going on.
Mm. I got a fantasy question for whichever one of you wants to answer it.
Oh boy.
Dwarves' lifespans. Because there's technically the elves live longer than humans, which is pretty common across elf depictions. So I'm going to assume they're going with dwarven depictions as well. But I have no idea what their lifespans is. I've always pictured them as similar to human, but I don't
Uh,
know.
it all
So
depends.
uh so um okay. I'm gonna pick Tom Tolkien for once because funny enough, I love Tolkien. In his universe, as far as I understand it, dwarves can live to be somewhere to be 150 to 200 years old. So they have double the lifespan of what you would expect to be humans. There are the dwarves are the species that kind of varies the most in terms of fantasy. There's not really a consistent theme as far as their ages related to fantasy. Um, there are some depictions where dwarves can live to be up to 1,000, which is still shorter than elves. And there are some depictions where dwarves can be 500, yada yada, working their way down. And there are some depictions where dwarves have half the lifespan of humans. Um, it very much varies in terms of the fantasy genre. It's definitely one of those that uh, you have to give and take depending on what universe you're in.
Okay, because that was something I kind of needed to know
Yeah, I
uh,
figured.
to get their interactions with Frieren. Because I'm like, because like I said, I was kind of picturing them as being similar to humans, and the way he was interacting with her, I'm like, well, I guess he has a longer lifespan. I don't know how long it is. I guess I'll
Yeah.
ask the guys.
Really
So
the
it's
only yeah
really open
really
then
really
in
the
this.
only hint for him growing older is you can see there's lines around his eyes that grow deeper. And that's pretty much the only hint that you have because he otherwise looks pretty much the same.
Funny enough, I have been given enough time to grab hold of the D&D Player's Handbook, 5th edition,
Oh boy.
for dwarves. The age of dwarves mature at the same rate as humans, but they're considered young until they reach the age of 50. On average, they live about 350 years of age, and they can go upwards of 400 years. However, there are some sub races, such as hill dwarfs or mountain dwarfs, that have some variations.
And that's
There you
with
go.
D&D, so we get the
Variety.
universe stuff. Yeah. All right.
um,
Question has been answered.
yeah, no worries. I figured that would come up because he's the one that doesn't obviously age. He just says he's starting to feel older.
Yes, in this world, couldn't tell you.
Yeah, and I
Definitely
feel like
age.
go ahead.
Definitely aged the best of the groups that are mortal.
Yeah, said the mortal. That's like, yeah, you got. I mean, Freeman looks pretty good. Um, I do you guys think he kind of blew her off a little bit because he's like, I can't really swing my axe anymore. Right after we just saw him fight a big dog demon thing, he seemed
Uh,
very capable still.
yes, but he wasn't using an axe.
Well, yeah,
Like
but
he did it
he's
with a
jumping
stick.
around doing
Yeah.
crazy warrior stuff, so I'm sure he's still capable.
He's very
Him,
And I would
agile.
imagine going forward in the show, he's probably going to have some form of combat going forward. Uh,
um,
but that's a guess.
yeah, he is. I don't know if I took it as him blowing it off. I just took it him as like his fighting days are done. He wants to rest. You know, the only reason he was out there being a frontline for Frieren is because they were on their one last adventure together to see the meteor shower. Um,
Yeah.
it could be seen as that. I'm not. Like I said, I'm not sure I buy it as been blowing her off, but I guess there is an element of that that could be read in.
He is quite blunt with a response, but it could
Yeah,
be his own self choice after many
yeah.
years. But
He is a dwarf and he is pretty blunt. Like he's always the one that's jumping on insulting Heiter the most about his drinking habits, which kind of shows you his gruff personality when it comes to that sort of thing.
Okay.
Did you see it as him blushing it off, or
Um, no, I kind of saw more like you, where he's just trying to live his life. He that the warrior life is over onto the rest part of his life.
Mhm.
But I do fully think he's still capable of wielding an axe and fighting. He's just kind of being soft about it, I think.
That's fair. Uh, I kind of got the impression as well, going on that scene. I got the impression that Eisen was kind of surprised about Frieren's like change about wanting to learn more about humans now. Did you guys get that as well?
from
I got
Eisen,
a little vibe of it.
Yeah.
Eisen like
Yeah, I
cutting ties, kind of.
no, when Frieren says I'm gonna go, I want to go learn about more about humans, and like I want to learn more about humans, I got the impression that Eisen was actually surprised by that.
I didn't pick that
Yeah,
up. Nope.
Okay, yeah. Crimson got a bit of it, so all right. It could be either way. Like him just um.
He doesn't show much expression, so
no, he does not.
What are you talking about? That beard gives you everything you need to know.
Does he have one chin, two chins, four chins? What we got going there? I
yeah, it
don't
hasn't
know.
even tinted in color since the 50 years. So,
Well, he dyes his beard. He can't have
oh,
that
gotcha.
gray.
He dyes it.
Got to keep up appearances.
Yeah. He could.
Gold rust blonde.
Yeah, gold rust.
um,
What a color.
It's Eisen's color. A detail I caught at timestamp 8 minutes 6 seconds, kind of during the 50-year jump following Frieren, before going back to the kingdom. Frieren's journal depicts the horn that she needs in it, which is a very short couple seconds shown, but it's a nice detail. I like picking up because that's what she went back to go get from Himmel or Himmel. Sorry.
Yeah. That was the clip before she was like floating in the pond, right?
Yeah.
And then they cut to the retailer, the
Also,
merchant,
re-showing that she's prone to being caught by mimics.
yep,
showing she does not learn from her past mistakes.
she does.
I
She
I
just
don't know what's
mimics is.
obvious about a mimic because the group said it was obvious that it was one, and she still fell for it. The first one.
Yeah, they
Uh,
will. They do explain the whole mimics thing going on later on in the show. It's one of the funny tropes about Frieren's character.
I figured as much. It would be an ongoing joke or something.
It is an ongoing joke, but they also explain why mimics trick her all the time, or why she's willing to be tricked by mimics.
I'm curious how she got out of that second instance with it, because the first one, the three are like standing around watching her scramble around, and they're like, "Oh, we would have left you there to die," which gave me the indication that they helped her out of it. So I'm curious how she got out of it on her own in the second
There
instance.
is there is definitely an explanation as to how she does it later on in the show. Within the context of the pilot, though, we just have to assume she did some magical bullshit.
That's what I was going to say. She's a magic user. I'm sure she can get out of it.
uh, yeah. So that is a question that there is an answer to in the show. Unfortunately, it's just not in the pilot.
No, they all can't be answered in the pilot.
Yeah.
A question they could have answered in the pilot is, what is her connection to this blue bird that takes the horn? Does she know this bird? Is she sending is it a messenger bird? Is it just takes the horn out of her hand, but she doesn't complain about it. So
Yeah. You best faith assumption is it's a familiar. Then there's obviously like from that tier, there's like degrading tiers of it just being all the way down to it just being a simple messenger bird. Um, it's unclear in the first episode. My assumption is it's a familiar of a kind, but I'm still not sure because it's not really confirmed. The reason I just assume that is because obviously she didn't react to it being taken.
Yeah, she didn't fight for the item. She kind of just let it go. So I read it as it's her bird. I don't know what type of bird, and it's a magic bird, a normal bird. I don't know. I don't know why she would need to send the bird to carry it somewhere instead of just keep it on herself. That was my question with it, was why she needed to send it away.
Maybe it was the evil aura thing and she didn't want to get stares for it. I have no idea.
she didn't want to wind up looking like Himmel after 50 years, so she sent it away.
Yeah, she took one look at that character development or character change and was like, nope. um,
Do we
I
get to see her use the horn, or is that it in this?
you mean for future episodes?
Yeah, is that something she keeps as an ingredient or utilizes, or is that it for
Um,
this?
I remember her using it. I think yes.
Right.
And if it's not that horn, it's something very similar to it. Um, there's it's been a while since I've been to the show, a couple months now. So uh, yeah,
And I
I think she does use it.
okay. I do like with the horn how uh, Himmel cherishes it. Like it's a valuable item in his possession. It's for a friend. He's a man of his word, and she just says it's a convenient ingredient. Doesn't care. It has no emotional attachment to it,
Yeah,
and
and it
I,
shows the
I, I
different
like that thing.
perspectives they have. Yeah. Sorry, I interrupted you.
Uh, my last part with it was I don't really know why she was talking to herself out loud, but obviously it's for the audience sake.
I don't know about you, but I talk out loud to myself all the time, but I never claim to be sane, so there is
Crimson,
that too.
Crimson
I
catches
never
me
talk to
talking to
myself out
myself.
loud. Oh yes,
It's a great pastime having conversations with yourself out loud and making other people look at you like you're insane. Like you're some
but
insane, you're over 1,000-year-old woman or something. I don't know.
Don't fret, he's just on Bluetooth. Oh wait, he has nothing in his ears. Oh,
Is that a Captain America Avengers reference?
if you want to take it that way, sure. There was one bit that I actually found got to the point of damaging Frieren's character.
right.
And I know it's played for a joke, but the connection of usage of it, I think, is just too much. And that's when Frieren got impatient waiting on Himmel to leave.
And
I
why
wrote it
why is it
down.
damaging?
Because her instance of time isn't cherished until the funeral.
Okay,
Um,
I mean she could still want to do things quickly. Just because she has a lot of time doesn't mean she wants to take it slowly.
But if 50 years is just like, oh, see you then, like it's in 2 days, instance like nonchalantly, I feel like a single day is a blink in the eye to her. So the
I
use
mean,
of being impatient for a joke of like, come on, old man, we gotta go, just didn't seem fitting for me. Maybe if it was afterwards and she cherished more time, if she knew about like the life lesson, but it just seemed like when it got to that point of cherishing, it didn't go hand in hand.
you're looking
no,
at like the view of time a bit off because looking back, because she's so old, 50 years is nothing, but she still lives it in real time. So even though you can live a long time, you still want to go day to day at a good pace.
Well, yeah, but
Uh,
she even brings up at the
a
beginning a
day is
mere
still
10
24
years.
hours. Huh?
She even brings up at the end of their party a mere 10 years, like a blink of the eye.
Well, in her life as a whole, yeah.
So
But
if,
she still lives the 10 years. That's still a lived time. You wouldn't want to live it slowly. If you
yeah,
live 1,000 years, you wouldn't want to be bored 1,000 years. You'd want to actually live 1,000 years. Uh, so she she doesn't perceive time in real time differently. Her perception of time through her mind memory, that's what's weird with her. Because to her, 50 years is nothing, having lived 50 years. But day to day, it's still everybody else.
no, yeah, I know that, but it just feels like the impatience is the joke played rather than the actual feeling of herself because we're not at the point where she cherishes that. The only thing I can go with is that it's a week's journey to get to the place where she wants to see the meteors. And it's like, we got to make it by that time. But I don't know if that holds moreover for the use of a joke in the instance.
The only joke I got of it was about the bald men. Was about the hair being done. That was the joke I got. I don't know if the impatience was out of character for me. 'Cause I'm kind of with Crimson in that she would still want to get going. Like she was sitting out. It showed her sitting out there bored because she likes to still be doing stuff while even traveling and preoccupied. We see her reading a book when they're traveling back to the capital.
And if you wanted to go with like they have a certain amount of time, they have a week's journey. She doesn't know how long this old man's going to take to get there. Uh, so sooner the better would make sense.
Yeah, I guess I would go into that because she didn't expect Himmel to look that way after the 50 years. It was like unfamiliar to her. But then on the other end, sitting on the stoop, bored, if she had a book, why wasn't she reading then? So I don't know. I'm not fully swayed. I just maybe not fully as damaging as I thought, but I just think it's not maybe character damaging isn't the right usage of what I'm going with, but I guess the overarching tone of the pilot didn't seem fitting for that.
Well, how? Let's flip this really quickly into the opposite direction. So, what if this is her not still understanding like the importance of time? So, what if in this instance, it's a play on the fact of like, yeah, she just wants to get things done as fast as possible, but she still doesn't understand the value of time. So, the fact that that Himmel is taking too long for her is a play on the fact that she's impatient still, and that impatience kind of being the opposite of what it normally is, but still feeding into what her perception of time is.
I don't see it feasible for someone to be impatient and not cherish time.
Why?
Well, aren't they like two sides of the same coin? Like, got to get going, making efficiency, but then caring about not caring about the little. I mean, the efficiency she has is like 100-year plan, not so much the life of one being or a 10-year adventure. It seems like it has to be a certain aspect of time for her on her plate to be counted as something efficient worth doing.
Well, towards that point, it isn't her goal to get them to the vantage point then? Isn't that under that purview for you? She has an objective.
Yeah, that's the one thing I said I was kind of leaning on is that it's a week's time to get to the place where she wants to see the meteor shower with all of them, which is
And
going with the, I guess, not so damaging on her because it's efficiency to get there and she's run on others. She can't really traverse them faster and has to go at their collective pace to get there. But the use of like hurry up old man after showing like time frames going and moving to then the funeral afterwards of like, man, I really should have spent more time. on one person when it could have been with Eisen, could have been with Heiter, it could have been with anybody, or even a past family members or adventuring groups or stuff we don't know before the 10 years of venturing. Like it seems that's why I'm saying like this is probably her first one because of the realization of that at the funeral. Um, it just didn't seem to be a good step. It seemed like a step down to get there rather than a continually gradual up to get that emotional hit. Not saying the emotional hit didn't work. I'm just it wasn't as fluid, I think, as it could have been.
Well, and something you got to take into account with it. I don't believe this is her first group. She seems like an established adventurer. Uh, I think she would have just left them if they didn't do the 50-year comet thing or meteor shower thing. She would never have seen them again. She wouldn't have had any ramifications of seeing them old and die, and she knows they would. But seeing it firsthand can really affect somebody. So the fact that she does her missions and moves on, goes collect spells, better her magic, uh, she just doesn't stick around to learn these lessons firsthand. Just knows of them.
I suppose so.
I don't have much to say on this particular subject, to be honest. So I don't think it's particularly damaging to Frieren, but I definitely can see the side you're coming at it from. Um, for me, there's always a difference between like the mundane and like the grand scale perception. So this being a more mundane thing to her, like just sitting in the moment, would still is able to perceive time at a normal pace. And then obviously there's the grand scale where she doesn't fully understand like what 10 years is to other people in comparison to her. So that's kind of where I draw the dichotomy of those two things. So it still works for me. I don't see it as out of character. Um, but yeah, uh, if that's all for that scene, or do you guys have any final thoughts you want to add while you're thinking it over?
No, I got nothing else for that.
Um, no, I don't know if it just also goes with the timing of the pilot. If it's like use of like only had a certain amount of time and what they could convey in it. Um, because the death of Himmel, I'm sure, is a big part of the continuation of the season for Frieren's character of what she goes with, of understanding that. I'm hopefully at least. Um, but I guess with what they had to use in the small amount of that choice, which to me portrayed as a humorous choice of hurry up old man kind of thing of impatience, shouldn't I would have been more fine if there's no humor element at all to actually convey a more emotional story.
Yeah. Doesn't she? She doesn't call him old man. She pokes at him as for being bald.
Well, yeah, like,
What's
your appearance, what's the matter with your appearance? You're bald. And he goes, oh, well, even at age, you guys still look, you know, handsome.
even bald men have particular characteristics. Yeah, there was no mention of his age, so I don't know if it's. Uh, I think she's just poking
No, no,
fun. The
okay.
joke is she's poking fun of him is for his lack of hair. I
Yeah,
think.
the confusion coming across is hurry up old man isn't what she says to him in world. That is the joke taken out of audience perspective of this elderly guy taking his time when they need to go.
And that's meta, and I guess that's unfortunately that's subjective for me. So I guess I can't really speak to that. I never took that away personally from the scene.
Yeah,
Um,
I didn't either. I just took the bald joke. Um, shoot, I had another point. Oh well,
you got
gone.
it. Your point's gone. Okay.
But it was in relation to what we were just talking about. Oh well.
That sucks.
um, uh, I quite like uh the our introduction to Fern as a character. Now, I found this more convenient than the Himmel meeting. Fern just finding Frieren in the forest, even though she's out there. Even though we know she spends her time out there training and collecting stuff to cook with and make things with. I found that more convenient, I think, than the Himmel running into Frieren.
I
Hmm.
agree. Because at this point, she was looking for a cemetery, I guess, a grave. Uh,
I don't think she is. I think that's a joke. Actually, I think she's legitimately
oh,
there to look for him.
she said she brought the wine for his grave or whatever, which is what he said he that was his
Wanted to do it.
request,
Yeah, and she's trying
and
to make
he
her way to
wasn't
the holy
expected to live
city,
this long.
but
So
Um,
I
yeah,
did not
maybe.
expect.
Yeah,
I did not read her expecting to see him alive there at all.
maybe. I never took it that way, but yeah, I wouldn't be surprised. Like I'm middling on that, I suppose. So
I'm trying to figure out where was the connection that Frieren thought that Heiter was good to be dead at this certain tree. Is that just
oh
something
no,
Yeah, I
she
she
was
would
didn't.
just
take?
that,
Or
that was just her trying to navigate her way through the forest. She
okay,
complains about the forest being hard to navigate to get to the holy city.
okay, yeah, that's okay. Because I thought she was trying to get herself to the holy city, but then when we see Heiter's place, it's just in the middle of a forest.
Yeah, so she's looking either for, I guess for Crimson, she was looking for either Hyder's cemetery, or in my case, she was potentially just looking for Heiter, which I guess could be either. Um,
And I guess to put my 2 cents in it, I don't find it. I find it more of a convenience of Himmel finding Frieren in the city than uh, Fern finding Frieren in the forest.
oh, why?
Because the city layout of knowing where you're supposed to go, but a lot has changed and getting lost. Like eventually you'll find uh, Fern being close to a tree, which is an indicator in a empty forest with no one else around. I feel is more an indicator to find Frieren, especially with her was it her mana or aura or whatever being making her basically invisible. So it's not like even be picked up from Frieren to like notice or hear a stick break or something. It was picked up that way. So I think it's explained in this episode more of a instance of why Fern found Frieren.
Um, yeah, that could work as an explanation.
I mean, uh, she could have been anywhere. The the odds of her being near that tree and presumably where Hyder's house is. We don't know how close it is in relation to the tree or the town
No,
or kingdom, whatever.
just that Fern was
Uh,
gathering supplies.
yeah, and it just happened to be close to the tree. That's convenient. We see the forest is vast. It doesn't wrap around the entire kingdom, but it is like a crescent shape. It reaches around it a little bit. Uh, so there's certainly a more convenience factor here for me because the kingdom. She said there's change. She didn't say there's a layout change. So just assuming that the structures have been demolished and rebuilt to change the layout of the town. There's nothing to read for that. So I
I have
think
no
this is
issue.
definitely more convenient.
I ha-
I'm sorry, I find it a little. It's funny because I think it's also a time. I think she definitely find Himmel faster in the town by asking like explanations and like directions of where he is or what to find versus Hyder on her own in the middle of nowhere. Uh, sorry, that's just
I
tickling me.
agree. That wasn't the question we were talking about, though. We're talking about convenience.
Yeah,
He, uh, yeah, Himmel would be the easiest of the two to find. I agree with that.
uh,
Plus, she could
yeah,
have done the same thing, which is, I imagine, what she was going to do: get to the kingdom, asked where Hyder is or buried, whichever angle you want to go for, and then she'd go on her trek. But she got stumbled across Fern before she reached the kingdom.
do you think if Frieren came across that house, that Hyder's house, but didn't see anybody inside or around, that she would go up and ask for directions, or just continue on towards the holy city that she thinks the direction is?
I don't know enough about her to answer that. I don't know if she's super self-dependent to where she wouldn't bother asking, or she would take any help she could. I don't know enough of her.
Okay, because to me this also goes into what we did with Himmel earlier. Heimel, I keep getting Heimel earlier of what could have made it
No, you got it right the
worse.
first time.
Okay, what could have made it worse? And it's like if Frieren just went up to a random shack asking for directions and Heiter opened the door, I think that weakens it. But of course, that's not what they did.
Would also feel convenient. Yeah.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, okay. Spoilers for the show. Your explanation, Springs, works better than you think with how they explain how they can track people through their mana explosion or their exposure to mana. The reason Freerin can do that is because she's an experienced mage. Fern can't do that because she's inexperienced. Even though we see she has a lot of innate power, it would be. I don't think she says she can detect Freerin's mana yet.
Yeah.
Um, so that would work as an explanation for how that. I don't think that works, unfortunately, because Fern wouldn't know how to look for Freerin. The convenient aspect of it is just that she's that close and just happens upon her. I don't have an issue with her obviously being out in the forest collecting ingredients and that sort of thing. Um,
Is reading mana a passive ability or something you have to focus on?
Well, if it's
as
anything
far
like
as I understand
midichlorians,
going as far as I understand going into the rest of the show, it's something you have to focus on.
Because they weren't expecting free run, so she wouldn't be looking for mana trail or
Yeah.
anything.
And obviously, funny enough, you have the same fix here with the that you do with Himmel's issue with your Knight's Tale example. She went into town, got directions, and they pointed her out into the forest
Yeah.
or the
Uh,
cemetery. She'd be surprised, I guess, with the fact that she wasn't directed into the cemetery.
yeah, or earlier when she said goodbye at the bridge, she could have been at the cabin, and that's his house, and said goodbye to them there. So we established that she knows where he lives, and that's why she's in the woods looking for that cabin.
Oh,
That would be
like
an
she
easy
and I
little tweak.
like Eisen and Frieren walked Heiter to the holy city, pretty much.
Um,
It's a different town, mind you.
oh, then never mind.
Yeah, the holy city is different from the capital.
The exterior looked very similar.
Yeah, well, it is medieval times, and this isn't like, Game of Thrones or uh, Lord of the Rings. Some of the fantasy towns tend to blend together because a lot of old medieval towns tended to blend together.
Okay. Well, then my fix doesn't fix squat.
yeah, it's
Unfortunately, no.
not as a vast difference of Munchkin Land and Emerald City.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of starting to run low on notes here, fellas. How are you guys doing?
We got a couple more still. Uh,
All right.
I think
Why don't you take away,
a
sir?
detail I really like, which helps with the emotional hit, is the shot of the bell in the bell tower moving, but no audio, and then the initial shot after that showing kind of like the outside of the city by the grave, with the bells playing then. I think that hits a good tone for what they're
Yeah,
conveying.
I to add a little more onto that, the up close shot of like Freyren's reaction as well before the bells toll, really really good, and then it also adds into the emotional hit.
On the complete silence of the diggers, or the digger, I guess is just the one. Um, Digging, and then we get the sound effect, and then we get a flash of a memory. Dig sound effect, new flash of a memory. They were syncing up,
Yeah, good
and
audio sync choice
yeah,
there.
it was building up for a good moment there.
Yeah. Never underestimate the use of diegetic sounds. Really, they
It's good. They have their place.
do indeed. Um,
I guess Ryder, with what we talked about the intro, and then I guess the outro for the show, which matches up, but the intro being different. How usual is it for like a title of an episode to be that far ahead in something when it cut to black?
I had to check my timestamp. There was 7 minutes left. There's 7 minutes of credits in this. No,
uh,
there was not.
Wait, do you mean like a? Oh yeah, there's an episode like title. You mean right?
Yeah, before giving the
Yeah.
explanation of 20 years after the funeral.
That is more common than the intro being placed at the beginning. It happens more. It's funny because I have two other animes that jump into my head right now that I can remember that definitely do the mid credit title sequence. It's where they put their ads in Japan.
Okay. But being
That's
that
why they
late
do
in the
that.
episode, though.
Yeah, it happens. It's not impossible. It's just rare. It's not, but again, that one's more common than the intro being put at the beginning.
Okay.
So that's more normalized, shall we say?
All right.
Crimson, you got a point to jump to?
Yeah. So we get the final, I guess, sentence in here was, or conversation, I guess, was asking if Fern likes magic, and she says somewhat, and Frieren said, "Me too," something along those lines. Which I'm sure they're going to dive into going forward, because it's a bit odd considering she spends all of her time collecting spells if she
And
doesn't
then,
like doing magic.
boom, hard cut.
Yeah. So I'm sure they're diving deep into it. But in a pilot, such hypocrisy. Well, not hypocrisy, just doesn't line up with her actions. But I'm sure it's explained.
I
Blink
see what you
twice,
mean.
that's right.
And
Yeah.
I'm assuming you got something to say about the ending, Springs, judging by what you said there.
It's a very abrupt for me going into the end credits. Just that hard cut, um, which I'm like,
Funny
oh,
enough, I have the
it's over.
same I have the same notes. It feels abrupt. I don't know if it's an objective issue though. It's
Oh,
pretty much
not at
what I
all.
said in my notes, per word for word.
Yeah, no, 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 no. I don't think it's a problem on any means. It just caught me off guard. I went, oh,
Yeah,
it's over. It didn't like a fade to black or a music
yeah.
score, and it's just very abrupt.
Like Iron
I
Man.
yeah.
I'm
Funny
Iron
enough.
Man. Brain.
Well,
Yeah,
that's
funny
a
enough. I
lot
think
cooler.
uh, funny enough. I think the normally in a lot of the pilots we see like the hook at the end of an episode. So it's kind of strange that we got one like here where it's not necessarily a hook. It's
Oh
just
my god.
oh yeah, sorry. I got the reference. It just took a second because I didn't know if you were reacting to me, and then I realized you were making a reference.
Yeah, Friday 13th.
What a hook.
But yeah, it's pretty good. So there's typically in most shows that we see there's a hook at the end to kind of reel you in for the next episode. This one doesn't really have a hook at the end. It's more like I think the hook is in the intro itself, pretty much, and then it kind of just trusts you. It's strange in that like this doesn't function as well, I think, outside of like the streaming era because most TV shows are episodic, and this one's clearly not. It's just leaving off like, oh yeah, we'll stop here, and you're gonna be here for the next episode anyway. So
Yeah,
putting a lot of
and
faith in their audience.
the only hook really is the progression of Fern, and that's not I wouldn't really call that a hook. That's just
Yeah, there's definitely a character
what's
promise.
going forward. Pretty much, that's it.
Yeah,
Huh. Again, fun, interesting. I definitely do see a hook.
oh, you
Because,
do.
yeah, I do. Because Fearen's actually has similarity to Fern, who said, I won't take a child into battle with me and lead her to her death, but I'll help her train, which is getting that connection to someone being around to help. When Eisen, she asked him to join her, and he said no. So to me, that was like her wanting someone to be around, and then this is an opportunity to have someone around that she resonates with. And I'm like, that's a cool hook to show what would happen next with the training of someone she identifies to.
Okay, yeah, I would accept that. Like I said, I mean more of a hook in the grabby sense. That I don't see that as a hook in a grabby sense. There's definitely character potential as a hook for sure, but there's not that like, oh, aha, here we go to the next adventure. You know?
Okay, I saw the hook of like, well, not it's not a cliffhanger. I just saw the hook of like, okay, what is the development of these two characters together going to be?
Yeah, if that's how you're defining a hook, I totally agree. That's exactly what's there.
Now, I have a note here. I think it's really cool how it was done, and it's an art animation usage. And Crimson, I'm curious if you caught it when Heiter describes the grimoire having resurrection and immortality in it, and there's a shot that's, I guess, from the perspective of Heiter walking towards kind of like the exit, I guess, going to the stairs, because I think they're in a basement, and it's on Frieren, and it's panning, but it's an animation pan to show movement around her. What a clever usage of how to animate that. I thought it was so cool, because the background is kind of just a stretched out drawing that's just moving slightly to the side without actually animating the background. It's just being dragged. And Frieren is the one being animated only of turning.
Yeah, that's one of those animation shortcuts, because they wouldn't, with a background. Uh, it takes a long time to do a painted backdrop, and they'd have to stretch out the image even more to accommodate for the camera movement. So it's easier just to stick with the image they have, stretch it, move it. And of course, animating the character also takes a lot more effort as well. And they toy around with manipulating the backgrounds when Hyder is drunk in that flashback where we get the
Oh, kind of the wavy and zoom in on his
distorted,
face.
wavy look.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they do toy around a bit with their backdrops, implementing certain techniques with it.
I also caught it because it was an actual usage of showing movement in the camera rather than still shots, kind of been used throughout.
Yeah, it was mostly still.
Man, there's so much I want to talk about in this episode, but it's in relation to what comes after. Can't do
Well,
that.
I can't do
'Cause-
that.
yeah,
All the
exactly.
setup, huh?
If we were covering the
Yeah,
whole
there's
season,
yeah, there is a lot of setup in this episode. I individually, it's a good pilot. Uh, maybe even a great pilot. But
hint,
outside of that, it's really, really fucking good.
kind of curious why you pitched it. Uh, the last thing I have in my notes is the very ending of all of the voices overlapping one another to give the title of the next episode, I'm guessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was a little confused during that because I was letting the credits roll and I was writing in my notes, and then I just hear voices, and I'm like, "What the heck? I thought this was over." And
Yeah,
then I
that's how
look,
they do
and
that's
there's
how
no
they do their episode
visual,
previews. That's
and
not that's very common as well. So that's also not unique to this show.
I guess my
well,
one,
usually it's like a single voice saying the title, but this had a bunch of
yeah, I
people
guess my
talking
one
like
question
in
to
our
go with
head.
that is: are the voices used all within the following episode, or are they scattered throughout the season usage
Nope, scattered for the next episode only.
only? Okay, I guess that's
And then
helpful.
obviously when the next episode rolls around and that preview comes around, it'll be for the third
It's
episode that you
just
get all the voices
okay.
for.
Uh, I only have 2 points left. I don't know what everyone else is looking like.
Uh, I mean, I can talk about this for days, but Springs,
Isolated
what are
to
you
the
looking
pilot.
like?
Isolated to
Yeah.
I have, I guess, 2 points left too.
All
Um,
right.
my one, I guess, short one I'll go with, and then Crimson can go. The difference between the sub and the dub is, in the sub, anytime Freerun like talk to Hyder or end with uh, a comment about him, it was always "you corrupt priest" in the subtitles. But in the dub, there seems to be multiple variations to that. One of them, for example, kind of towards the end of "miscreant of the cloth." Like, there's just
Yeah.
other usages of that being said, which is just a difference I saw.
Yes, I do remember that. You're kind of making me want to rewatch the sub version because I'm curious to see if the Japanese or what they actually say is the same, or if they just simplified it for the subtitles.
Well, something I
Or
held
gave it
over
sounds
the
like they gave variety.
yeah,
Yeah.
something I
Yeah.
held over the difference was Freeman to me felt very more stoic and kind of just just bland
Cold.
or in serious tone in the sub, but as the dub had a little more emotion to her throughout.
But you also have to remember that might just be how we intake the languages because I know the
That's what I was gonna say.
culture in Japan is very different. That level of stoicism is more natural to them.
Yeah,
Um, And I'm in agreement. I think the voice actress does a great job for Frieren. I had her name written down somewhere, but
Well, with that, Crimson, go ahead with your point.
Yeah, so I like that they were talking about what their future's going to hold, and this is in the beginning
yeah.
on the carriage, talking about drop hunting. And it was a nice little thing they threw in there because this is after the adventure. They got to make money. They're not set for life. And then we find out they were offered 10 copper later. Uh, I don't know if that's actually what they ended up getting. They got the statue. But it would have been nice for me, unless I completely missed it, to find out what Himmel's job he ended up getting. Because we know Heiter stayed a priest and kind of went up the ranks of being a priest. Um, but Himmel, who brought up the job thing, I don't think we found out what he ended up doing during his life, did we?
We did not. I definitely would be interested in knowing.
Yeah, it felt like a loose end that they started there, and they could have introduced what he's been doing in the 50 years he's been gone, other than just waiting to give her the horn back.
Yeah, that's all. I don't know if I if call it a loose end, but I would definitely be interested in knowing for sure.
I'm with Ryder on that. I think it's totally acceptable not to know, and it could be played with, I think, later.
The fact that that we don't know feeds more into the fact the way Freerin feels like she didn't know him at all, or it kind of adds more to her breakdown. I think,
Ooh,
at least the
good
emotional
point.
punch of it.
Yeah, that I read into that a little bit in a later part of her commenting that charity was more of a Himmel's thing. Uh, I wrote down that she was more observant of them than she realizes, and I don't know if that's something she'll figure out going forward. That she did know more about them than she realized, or if I'm just reading into that a little bit much.
Do you want me to actually answer that question, or
If I'm reading into it much, you can tell me that,
um,
which will hint towards other things.
you're not reading into it much?
All right.
That's purposeful.
Okay. Well, good. Picked up something.
Good job. You're an avid watcher. Very proud of you.
Yes, I'm doing my job as a whatever
Movie
we do here,
podcaster.
review podcast.
Spriggs, you got one more point. You said.
I do. Funny enough, with Crimson's comment of, I'm going to start at the end with popcorn and did it backwards. I went, okay, I'll save my first point for the end. I guess it's a cliche or just on the nose. And I wrote it down because of that the first word uttered in this pilot is Freeren's name.
Unless you count the intro sequence,
I did not. No, I did not count the first lyric in the intro sequence as the first line of dialogue.
because
Oh.
the lyrics are important for establishing the world we're getting into for the pilot.
But you mean the first dialogue spoken,
Yeah,
being
that's
Freeren's name. Um. hmm. Yeah, I could say it's cliche. I think it's contextualized well enough though that it doesn't bother me. That's usually how I feel about cliches, because it makes sense that Himmel would call her out by name at that point because they're almost at their destination.
Yeah, which again goes into the
right.
A works totally well with the world and everything. The B, it's like, all right, come on.
Springs, can you give me other examples?
Off the top of my head, not specifically, but something like, I don't know, Adventure Time, and the first thing that Jake says, like we see Finn and Jake running, and Jake just goes, yeah, Adventure Time, and they do something. It's like, all right,
You don't like your title drop sequences at the beginning, huh? You gotta wait.
like it's, I don't know, it just seems kind of corny.
Right. You have to admit though, it's far better than Han Solo. Right?
In Han Solo giving him his name. Is that
Yes,
what you want?
I know what he's saying. Uh, yes, but
Why
that's
can't that be
different.
the origin of his name? Okay, what's wrong with that?
It's annoying, is what it is. Yeah, no, like, okay, so I think I've explained my perspective view of this before, Springs, and obviously I'll let you state yours again after I'm done. Usually, when it comes to cliches like this, my rule is it contextualized in the universe, uh, and does it work well without it being like, is it damaging if they do it? Pretty much. Um, that's pretty much how I feel about most cliches. There are probably exceptions that I can't think of, but typically, if you're gonna go with a cliche, as long as it's well contextualized, I'm probably gonna be okay with it. And as long as you know you keep the tone going forward, so it's clearly not a joke. From just the example you gave, Springs, I would probably have more issue with the Adventure Time one because that's more of a reference to the title of the show rather than a specific character. Um, but in this case, I obviously don't have much of an issue with it. I acknowledge though that it is a cliche. But I think they contextualize it well enough in universe that it doesn't bug me. So on to you for your point.
Well, I'm trying to think of a different example to go with that, like with what you just said of I don't know, like Ben 10, and the first word that said is Gwen screaming Ben because he did something. It's like, all right. With the example
I mean,
you
that's
just
just
give of the A bit of like contextualized in the universe and the world and fits with the characters, I see that as all the objective part of it, like it works in the world and functions. The B part of it of like subjectively to myself, I'm like, all right, little much. Could have been
yeah.
different, but it's like I see the tongue in cheek that's usaged here. Um, so
Uh, yeah, Ben's a good example. Ben 10's also a good example. Yeah, I mean, it's done for efficiency's sake. I understand that's the point and tool of it, I suppose. Um, like so you know what that name is referring to immediately, or like whether it's a reference to the show or whether it's a reference to a character, you are dispelled with all the delusions as to what Frieren could possibly mean by being shown that it is this character.
yeah, I mean that would be an
Uh,
interesting example. I don't know where I would take it if like Ben 10, if it started off with Ben's name being called by like Gwen and Grandpa and like random people just saying his name in like a little montage before we actually see him 10 times. I'm like, okay, they said Ben 10 times. Is that clever or is that just too much? Is that too far? But that would be covering something that doesn't exist. So
yeah, it's true. I think, funny enough, if we're totally creating our own thing here now. If you're going to create a montage of somebody making like a bunch of people saying their names, I think one of the way to do that would be to ramp up like outside pressure. Because when you gave the example of the montage with regards to benefit being too much, I immediately thought of the whole Great Expectations thematic through line for Into the Spider Verse. Like if in that sequence where Miles is getting really really stressed out at school, and you just hear people calling his name constantly, it adds into the stress that he's feeling up until and like it cuts to quiet and silence when he like closes the door to his room, that sort of thing.
yeah,
Um, so I don't know why I just thought of that, but
no,
that would
that's
be my what I would like to do if I were going to open up a movie with a somebody's name being said constantly. I would use it as an external pressure.
gotcha. And Crimson, to go off of what you said with the lyrics of like the beginning of the song to then versus the dialogue start.
Mhm.
Um, what comes to mind is like you could say that with like SpongeBob. You know, SpongeBob has the whole opening. They say his name. It's like okay, that's what the show's called. But if the episode starts with someone saying SpongeBob SquarePants, I'm like, okay, that's on the nose of it. And there's got to be example of
I
that.
mean, I get
There's
you were going for. I was just poking and prodding.
oh, okay,
The- Yeah,
As we do. Um,
as I,
our,
as I
uh,
like to do. My
as
last
Crimson,
point
yeah.
I had
Go.
was just an acknowledgement of the head pat joke. I didn't want to go through this and not acknowledge it because I found it quite amusing, and I hope they keep it going forward with however long uh, Heiter's going to be in the show. I don't know if he makes it all the way or if he passes away at some point, but
well, rather than
I hope it
on
gets
the funeral
continued.
deathbed or not funeral, rather than like the hospital deathbed where it's the hand in the hand, and then the person who's passing like drops because it's weightless because they can't. His hand is just going to be on her head until it falls off.
Yeah, yeah, something like that. I hope it continues because I think it's a good good character interaction that they have, something unique to them.
I want to talk about it so bad. um, all right, and I guess with that, gentlemen, shall we move into ratings?
Yeah, I'll go for
Sure.
that.
All right. Uh, I choose Crimson. Why don't you start us out?
Uh,
Cheese.
all right. I will.
I'm
I'll
going for the
start with
shock value.
my subjective first. As stated in the beginning, it was a bit slow. I think innately something being slow is not bad, but for me, it can hamper a pilot because personally, I want it to be a bit more engaging. Not necessarily action equal engaging, but I wasn't fully in with the intro to this. But the more once we get to Himmel being old and we get more of uh, uh, Frieren's time stuff we've been talking about, I got a bit more interested because I could see paths they could take with this to make her quite interesting.
If I
And
may,
okay.
it didn't have that action you were looking for of I'm gonna bleep myself, but an accusation of blanking a princess.
That's a hook. No, it did not. It did not have that. Um,
Where did that come from?
are you talking about engagement in a pilot? And that definitely got me engaged to pursue that show.
Oh, right. Okay.
uh, yeah, there was nothing like that in here where I got a massive hook, but it was. I see potential in it, uh, so I'm giving it a 6.5. I'm fine continuing it. Writers definitely saying it ramps up and gets better going forward, so I'm sure that number would rise watching it. Objectively, I didn't find too many issues with this. I think uh, Himmel's appearance is not great. I attribute it to be like an anime trope, but I'm quite limited on anime, so I don't even know if that's a real thing or if I'm making that up. Which whatever reason they chose for it, I don't think it was a wise choice because he doesn't look like himself, which is an issue because he is still himself. Um, I think all the characters are well characterized. With that, I'm talking like writer. I'm still on your points. Uh, I understand how a lot of the characters work, except for Eisen, as we talked about. He doesn't get too much here. He's a warrior. He's blunt. That's about it. Uh, he's kind, I suppose, and I'm fine with that. The animation style, uh, not my cup of tea. I like more crisp, clean looking um, animations. But this, we didn't get the budget, but I have a feeling it's on the lower side of an anime budget, just for the animation, because we get a lot of slow frame rates, and which isn't objectively bad. It's just could be better if they had a larger budget. Um, I feel like all that talking, I feel like I don't have much to really go off of. The emotional buildup they did with Frieren towards Himmel's death, I think they did a good job with the limited time they had because that was what, like 12 minutes, 15 minutes.
It's something they had to
Uh,
nail.
yeah, introducing all these characters and then paying off with one of their deaths. I think they did a serviceable job with that.
I think it was 20 you said before the title cut.
Well, there was 7 minutes left, but that was. I'm trying to hold on. I didn't actually write down when he died, so I'm just approximating. So sure, 20 minutes. We'll say 20 minutes. Still a limited amount of time to set up the characters and their death. But I think they did a good job handling that. And in terms of the world with magic, usually I'm a stickler with magic. I always bring it up as issues. We have no rules here really in terms of magic set up right now, other than It's dangerous to be an apprentice. You can die pretty easily if you're not careful. There's mana involved. It's very loose. Don't have anything to really criticize with it yet. So with all that, I'm giving it an 8.5 objectively.
All right. I'll go next. Um, save good old Springs for last there.
Oh boy.
I'll do my subjective first. I have a very uh hard time finding good fantasy without without delving into too many tropes. I mean, from my subjective perspective, most things after the Lord of the Rings films are often only average at best in terms of the work in the genre. Most things, there are exceptions to that. Um, I think what's one of the reasons why I latched onto Frieren as much as I did. Um, it's probably the closest I've gotten to enjoying a high fantasy series in a long while. Um, I think my words for what I'm about to say have been said already about Frieren, so I'm not going to claim ownership of these words. I think Frieren is a revival of the fantasy genre in terms of for anime in the same way that Game of Thrones was revival for fantasy and the Western media scape landscape. Um, but then that's purely subjective. Um, I quite like the show overall. With relation to this episode specifically, it was very slow, but it pulled me in an interesting way in the sense of it wasn't really relying on anything outside of its characters. And when a show does that, I tend to enjoy it more than I normally expect on my first watches or subsequent rewatches. Because for me, that's just different, you know. So subjectively, I am at an 8.5 specifically for the pilot. That does go up if I'm counting for the rest of the show. Um, Objectively, um, Frieren is a subversion of the fantasy genre in a more meta sense. Um, I'm going to use Game of Thrones again. In the same way that Game of Thrones was in the first seasons, a ruling tyrant has been overthrown, and in this case, like the Demon King has been overthrown, and it's the world is now stable for a proverbial period of time, and that's all happened off screen. Um, it's inherently it's typically different from what you would expect from the fantasy genre because the main thrust that you normally get with the story is now gone. The big bad has already been defeated. Um, there is uh, so it puts a sharp focus here on Frieren on the characters over the plot. And there are main differences, and there are obviously are a plethora, mind you, but the one that sticks out to me as to what Game of Thrones does slightly better is Frieren doesn't have the sense of the politics because the politics are what drive the characters and the plot forward in that world. Here, we don't really get that as a overall thing with regards to the story. Here, we just have the characters to push the story forward, and that's not necessarily a bad thing. It does leave to it can exaggerate that slow feeling that Crimson and I allude to. Um, with regards to the story. And I don't know if that's an objectively bad thing, but it does feel slow. The world building is simple enough. Magic's abstract in what we know in that we don't know fully how it functions. Uh, there are interesting gaps that I would want to be filled in with what little we see of magic and how it works. We know that the king saves face from going to give them only 10 copper coins at the start of their journey to throwing a festival for them and returning as heroes. And we know that the world is celebrating an era of peace. And as it stands, the world building outside of that tends to take a back seat once again for the characters. Um, what I have for in charge of criticisms for the world building are mostly questions and maybe nitpicks. So nothing that breaks the story thus far in terms of world building. And I kind of already went to the plot a little bit. The plot's again driven by the characters and more like Frieren's I guess, on her whimsical choice of having to leave Himmelhorn and wanting to go see the meteor shower. But that's character driven, not necessarily plot driven. Um, for characters, I see little reason to include anyone outside of our small group except for Fern, because Fern is here, and we get a very very quick characterization for her. She's a little on the sassy side, but she's still very well mannered, polite, and helps Heiter around the house. Uh, Her relevance to the story is only at this point shown in the character hook Sprinks and I dug into, and the opening in which we see her as well. Um, and yeah, I think it's really, again. There's not really much to go off for Fern. So I'll go into Eisen. Simply characterized. He doesn't change much physically over the time jump. His demeanor, though, as far as we can understand, does change, and he does tend to, I think, grow in respect towards Frieren a little bit. He's really the first to note Frieren's change, or at least hear Frieren's change after uh, Frieren has a goal to study humans more. He also comforts her when it hits her that Himmel is finally gone, and also with Heiter takes kind of the brunt of the heckling as the heckle back at the funeral. Um, More practically, as far as we understand in the first episode, he was a great warrior, and he's clearly the tank of the group, which we see in the brief fight with the dog. Uh, it's clear that he has investment in the group to a degree. We're just not quite sure how deep that goes, and he has that gruff, blunt side, but he does care for them all the same. Um, so, despite all that, his short time in the show, he's extremely well characterized. Uh, that moves on to Himmel. Himmel is the first one to worry about their prospective futures. Um, he's also the first person we hear speak as well. He's playfully narcissistic about his appearances. He relishes his memories with his group, and he pushes back in a not and while also avoiding being rude about Freeren's dismissal about it being a mere 10 years. Um, so we learn from other characters his bravery, his tendency towards charity, and ultimately the lingering questions he leaves in the mind for Frieren. Um, he's also willing to hold on to the dragon horn simply because it was asked of him, and he sees it as a treasure bestowed to him by a friend to look after. Um, he is gets some of that youthful joy back, I suppose, when he goes back out to adventure with his group one last time to see the meteor shower. Um, and otherwise, I think Himmel's a great character to springboard everybody off of going forward. And again, they make you at least understand Freeren's perspective on Himmel in the lead up to his death, which I think is what they pretty much would need to nail for a pilot, because there's not really much going on in the pilot itself as far as character work outside of banter. We learn the basics of their relationship. We don't feel the depth of that relationship until that point. Um, Hyder is probably the character where most of the contextual humor comes from, and probably has the most notable changes over the course of the story, going from a corrupt priest to an upstanding man of the cloth who, in his old age, does charity work and someone who's sworn off drinking. Uh, I think the charity work can be inferred as something that he got from Himmel, one way or another. Um, I think there is a clear distinction between the Hyder that we see at the very beginning and the Hyder we see at the very end. And it's good to see that Himmel rubbed off on him in some subtle way. Uh, and then again, that might be my inference to the character, as I discussed with Sprinks. And I like that he admits to the fear of his own death at the end, because it shows that he's also grown even from that point. Um, Frieren is arguably the most reserved for the group. It's clear from the outset she perceives the world a little bit differently from everybody else, given her exceptionally long life. She likes to look for spells in her free time. Plans a simple sentry for looking for spells, as if a sentry is not much time to her. And she doesn't think much of time until Himmel passes. I like to think even I like that she shows up to Heiter, showing that Himmel's even in death had also rubbed off on her in the sense that she had either showed up to pour one out for Heiter on his grave, or showed up to see Heiter. Um, I think Crimson moved me a little bit. I'm more in the middle now on that particular facet. She could be there to absolutely just pour one out for her on the grave rather than just to see him and that being a joke. Um, she has issues with mimics. She is greatly adept at magic. Has regrets for not realizing how important that decade of time was for her, or is at least starting to develop regrets. And more importantly, her head is not for padding. Ha ha ha. Her character growth within the episode, while not subtle, is still pointed both before and after Himmel's death. And we see kind of that forming drive and curiosity to learn and know humans more forming. And it's why she pays a visit to Heiter, or partially why she is willing to stay for Heiter as well at the end. Um, Objectively, I think I'm at a 9 as well on this. Or objectively, I'm at a 9. I don't have much wrong here to go off of as far as the story, and there's plenty of setup to go forward. It does its job as a pilot. And with that leaves you, Mr. Sprinks, sir.
Awesome. I get to go last. I'm gonna start with my subjective. I think it's a fun, good show. I didn't find it as slow as the other two put it, but engaging. And I guess slow comparatively to other things. Um, it gave me a sense of melancholy over the show, of just this kind of unbeknownst sadness of the difference of an immortal being, or not immortal, Frieren's not immortal to my knowledge, but a someone who has a lot more time on their hands than others. And the instance of identifying that in a very strengthening friendship or misunderstanding sense that she has at the funeral of Heimel just really hit me, and I think the emotion really worked for the time it had and used. And to me, that's my favorite part, like just that story and chunk. The after bit of, I guess, that cut to black title, and then everything with Fern and Heiter afterwards, I didn't find as likable or engaging as much. I think it would have really hit to end with that, to feel like the pilot to me was a whole end of a story of a character, to then move on of like what's going to happen next, to start this whole new adventure of her life with a new understanding, which still happens. It's just the more isn't isolated to its own in like in episode 2. um, it's added on as like an epilogue-esque to the funeral. But I would not be against seeing more. As Writer put it, there are other fantasies out there that I think are better, at least for my enjoyment of pilot engagement. Um, but it leaves a lot of curiosity, a lot of questions unanswered, which give me that hook of like trying to figure out what's going to happen and why was this here, and explanations to things moving forward. So it's got me on that, but I I'm just kind of like uncertain about Frieren herself, of how she's how much she's stuck in herself, of like her 100-year journey of what she's planning versus the uh I guess sympathy she has onto others of being around them. Um and I guess that could just be portrayal of both the sub and dub of how she goes about interactions with things, until I guess the funeral really shows something. But if that's who she's been this whole time, I don't find that as a totally likable protagonist for me, or someone to stick with. Um, so to me, I'm tying with Crimson, and I'm giving it a 6.5. However, I'm thinking that the possibility, if I saw more of the show and the connections that this pilot makes to future things, could strengthen it and have me enjoy it more, or possibly, because I'm unsure, could worsen it. But I have it as 6.5. Objectively, I think the animation's really good, and I think the animation usage with the cinematography that they do use at parts are good, and above par. Again, I've said it multiple times again with animation, it's harder for me to identify what's just stenciled over storyboard and what's usage of the moment of director of photography or cinematography usage. Um, so I think it's nicely done. Um, Lighting can't really tell on because it's all artificial but chosen to be that way. It's not in the vein of nothing stood out like Castlevania with the candlelight to me when we tackled that. It all seemed workable and fit. Um the A lot of it kind of was that animation saving budget parts of like when they're around the campfire going to the second, I guess, meteor shower in this pilot. The fire isn't really flickering a lot of flame lights or bouncing around. It's kind of stationary, just glow onto the characters of the lighting of the situation. So instances like that, which aren't damaging, but it's not as full on animated as it could have been. Which I guess also just helps the tone or stylize. Sorry, not tone, the stylizing of the show. The characters I think all fit well with them. Heiter being this kind of corrupt priest of being a bit of a drunk and silly at times, but lighthearted is good. I like actually with the party. I like how they're all stationed out individually of being different. It was brought up earlier how Eisen kind of stood out not as an outsider, but just not much on him. And I think because of that makes him a difference to the rest of the party, which I like as a difference of them. Um, and then their outfits as well as you kind of had the Hider focused on green. Um, Himmel was more of like a blues and whites. Eisen had that lawn red cloak, and Frieren mostly whites as well, but not as Himmel had more blues, which is also a nice little touch of like a connection of this episode of Frieren to Himmel is that they both share a somewhat similar color palette or have one primary color on them that matches, which I picked up. I forgot to bring up, but I did like that. Um, let's see, editing overall editing's fine except the very abrupt ending that's just chosen that way. I guess that it's fine working that way, but everything else is good. Um, I had little things here and there about the impatience that Frieren has with how she's covering time and the overarching kind of like pace of that, and I some stuff that's used as a joke situation where I feel like for the emotional payout that they're trying to achieve didn't need to be placed, but it is there to show a difference of so it's not all one tone, which I think would have made it feel more slow if it all felt stationary to one expression versus multiple instances of adventure and humor and wholesomeness and sadness and things they encompass. So overall, I have it as an 8. Um, I don't know if a rewatch would help with that, but I'm sure the details picked up that I am unbeknownst of for this pilot that connect to things later could show a detail mark of increased attention that they have for the pilot. One I brought up was that how the horn is in the book that Fern's reading during the 50-year span before going and getting it. So, oh, and
Well,
one last thing. I think the orchestral pieces are beautiful. The bit that plays when Eisen and Frieren split outside the kingdom, and that just music is really well done.
yeah, the music is god tier for the entire show. I really appreciated their orchestral stuff. Uh, all right. I guess with that, gentlemen, shall I read us out? Because that was free reign.
Yeah,
I got one last
Oh, you
thing to throw
do?
out there. Yeah, Sprinks. You're really into fantasy. Did this scratch that itch, or not quite? You said you had others better, but did this fulfill
it
your fantasy itch?
it helped. It did help. What I really like is that it didn't give you a whole world situation like this is this world and this is all these things that happen in it, and then it focuses on the small group. I like that it starts you off on the small group to begin with, and you learn the
It,
world through their eyes of them. Like if they
they don't
expand it.
front load a bunch of information. Yeah.
Yes. Um, I am more inclined of a preference to Lord of the Rings, Game of Thrones, Legend of Vox Machina, um, shows like that, or other fantasy things like that. Sorry, whew, I almost said show. Rings of Power, no.
You're funny. All right, gentlemen. With that, shall I read us out?
Yes.
I believe so.
All right. Well, audience, thank you for listening, whether it be Spotify, Anchor, Amazon, Castbox, Google Podcasts, Pocket Casts, Samsung, and iHeartRadio. And if you're on our YouTube and Rumble side of things, watching our PNG YouTubers, thank you for listening and watching there as well. Feel free to like, comment, subscribe everywhere. Tell us how much you hate our opinions or how much you love them. As always, I have been a Geeky Writer.
I'm Crimson Maroon.
And I'm Sprinks.
We will catch you next time. Later, everybody.
Bye.
Toodaloo.